So we'll begin with EVA 1. It's going to be performed by John Grunsfeld and Drew Feustel. This will be Drew's first EVA. The crew members will egress out of the shuttle airlock, which you see flashing there. Once they're done with their egress activities, John Grunsfeld will translate aft in the payload bay. He will begin by retrieving the MFR, or manipulator foot restraint, from the aft fixture and installing it onto the robotic arm with Megan's help. The MFR is the worksite platform that the robotic crew member will be using during the duration of the various EVAs. Once the MFR is installed, John will then retrieve the BAPS support post and retrieve it from its launch location that you see flashing there to its install location. The BAPS support post provides additional stability to the telescope during the various tasks throughout the EVAs. At that point, he'll go to the translation aid and deploy it from its launch location to its deployed location. The translation aid allows for the crew members to easily translate between the payload bay and the telescope. The last task is then the deployment of the aft fixture. It is the temporary stowage location for the large scientific instruments, and we'll see this in more detail a little bit later. While John is doing this, Megan will manipulate the robotic arm and the MFR over to the forward part of the telescope. Drew is on the forward part of the payload bay, and he will be performing some translation adaptation activities since it's his first EVA. Once he's complete with that, he'll ingress the MFR, and Megan will manipulate him to the first location. First thing Drew's going to get is the handhold, which he'll be using to mass handle the Wide Field Planetary Camera 2, or the WFPIC 2, which is the current instrument that's up on the telescope. You can see this being practiced in the pool. Drew's going to install the handhold, and then he'll go ahead and remove the old instrument. And this is NBL footage again of that activity happening. Once the instrument is out, Megan will maneuver Drew over to the aft fixture, which is where the temporary stowage of the old instrument will be placed. This is footage of it being temporarily stowed. Once that's complete, John will translate to the W site and open up the lid. Drew will retrieve the handhold, and together they will install the handhold onto the new wide field camera number 3. And then together the crew members will remove the new instrument from the W site to then install it onto the telescope. And from this footage, you can see the relative size of the instrument to the crew members. Again, once it's been removed, Megan will then manipulate Drew over to the telescope, and together they will install the new wide field camera number 3. The handhold will then be removed, brought back to its launch location, and then in order to save the payload bay, they'll have to remove the old instrument from its temporary stowage location and place it back into the now empty carrier where the new instrument came up. Once the old instrument is stowed back into the carrier, the handhold will be removed, and then the lid will be closed. And this is NBL footage of the lid being closed. Once this task is completed, the crew will then begin the new task of the SICNDH, the Scientific Instrument Command and Data Handling box. The new box is located on the aft face of the mule, or the aftmost carrier. And this is a video footage of John practicing that. He's translating to that box right now. The white box that you see in the center of the screen is the MLI cover that is flown on top of the new SIC&DH. It is bolted down with 8 bolts, and John will be releasing all of those in support of the handoff. Drew will be up at the telescope at Bay 10. He'll open up the door, and on the inside of Bay 10 will be the old SIC&DH. All 6 of those boxes that you see are actually grouped together with one plate. Once that gets removed completely as one unit, the crew will then meet down in the payload bay to do a swapping of old for new. John will then take the old one, put it back on the aft face of the mule where the new one came from, and then Drew will take the new one and install it on the inside of the Bay 10 door. Once that's completed, Drew will then close the Bay 10 door, which you see happening right now. At that point, John will then be translating to underneath the telescope, and he will be driving the SCM, or soft capture mechanism, primary bolt. The soft capture mechanism is a mechanism which will be attached onto the telescope to allow for a future rendezvous with the telescope. The EVA interface for this mechanism is a single bolt, and as this bolt gets driven, the latches will release from the payload bay, and then it will attach at the same time to the telescope, and you see that mechanism flashing right now. Once the SCM task is completed, John will then translate to the aft face of the mule again, and this time he will be retrieving 3 locks or latch over center kits. He'll be handing these off to Drew for installation. These locks are actually get-aheads for EVA 3 for the COS COSTAR and ACS tasks. They allow for easier opening and closing of the -V2 doors on that day. In the end, they should be saving us around 25 minutes of EVA time on EVA 3. These are the -V2 doors on the telescope. In a moment, we have footage of Drew installing one of the locks. This is at the topmost location. The mechanism itself is straightforward, and it's a simple over-center mechanism that saves time by the crew not having to drive any bolts. And there's the final handle to perform the final engagement. Three of those locks will be installed on the -V2 doors, and then at this point the crew will clean up the payload bay and come inside, and that's the end of EVA 1.